All right, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be back here again for the second year in a row. My name is Celia Chomón Zamora, and I am the Director of Professional Learning and Certification at ACTFL. I'm very happy to be doing the keynote today, talking about creating spaces, a journey towards equity in our language classrooms. So for those of you who don't know me, I like to always give a little bit of a background as to who I am and why I feel compelled to talk about the things that I do. So I was born in Venezuela to Cuban and Spaniard parents. So if you were here last year, you know why I have 3 bullet points to explain where I'm from. And I was raised in Miami, Florida. I taught English, Spanish, and Japanese in K-12 as well as in higher ed. For over 15 years, I attended West Point, more on that later. I'm a proud graduate of FIU as well as Georgetown University, and I'm again working at ACTFL, and I'm proudly married to, raising a teacher and researcher of, and myself a heritage language speaker of Spanish. Let me give you a quick outline of today's presentation. We're going to talk about equity, but I like to frame it as creating spaces. So I'm going to kind of chunk it up into the following: creating spaces in my life, creating spaces in education, creating spaces for diverse voices and learning, as well as creating spaces for action. But before we begin, let me center our conversation. So first of all, let's talk about equity. This is my definition of equity, and that's what I'm going to be using as we talk for the next hour. For me, equity is ensuring everyone has the support they need to achieve their full potential through support, meeting them where they are, and providing the appropriate resources. I'm sure you've noticed that there is a random empty chair up here, and that was not a mistake. This empty chair, I would like for it to represent for this whole week that you're talking about equity. This is a poignant symbol of what equity is. Because every single one of us here as educators has an empty chair in our classroom. You may not recognize it or you may not notice it, but this empty chair symbolizes those who are unheard, unseen, or misunderstood in our classrooms. It also represents those individuals that have been marginalized due to language, due to immigration status, socioeconomic status, because of special needs, race, gender, religion, and ethnicity. When we look at this, it's essentially us telling ourselves that we, because of systemic issues far out of our control, essentially we as educators need to address and confront what is happening, that we have these empty chairs in our classroom. But the empty chairs aren't only exclusion. It's also a potential opportunity for an invitation to invite for potential contributions, conversations, and differences of perspectives that we can bring into our classroom. So as we're talking about this, I want you to think about who your empty chairs are in your classroom. I also want you to think of why they're empty and what you could do throughout this entire week to make sure that they are filled. Let's begin. Creating spaces in my life. So I got here in 1990 when I was 6 years old. And if you know a little bit about weather, in 1992, a very big hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane, ransacked Miami, Hurricane Andrew. So I was only 2 years here. My parents did not know anything about hurricanes, so they thought that we were going to be okay with putting a cross of masking tape on our windows. And that is how we went through Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 hurricane. Clearly, it was a very traumatic moment in my life. But that trauma, for some reason, turned into obsession. My nickname at home was Weather Maria, because while other kids were talking about Spice Girls and Pokemon, I could tell you the 5-day forecast in any city in the United States. I could tell you the jet stream for the next 2 weeks, and I can tell you the precipitation in Chicago, Illinois. And I was 8. I realized that I loved weather, but more importantly, I loved broadcasting. I wanted all the attention on myself. I don't know if you've noticed that I like talking and I like attention. So my first love, my first career was broadcasting. That is what I wanted to do my entire life. Playdates consisted of me forcing my friends to do newscasts. It's a wonder I had friends. And I had 2 dreams as a broadcaster. My first dream was to be on 60 Minutes, not Primer Impacto, on 60 Minutes, prime time, Dateline, and also my dream, much to my mother's chagrin, was to be a reporter in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. You know, the one with the poncho and the palm trees. Unfortunately, that dream did not come true, but the closest I got was during Hurricane Vilma. 19-year-old Celia. To be young. So I wanted this my entire life, and I begged my parents to put me in the best broadcasting magnet school. The best broadcasting magnet school was an hour away from home, and it was very, very expensive. So my parents said, no. But we did find a school that had a broadcasting program about 45 minutes away that was a lot cheaper. So that's what we did. But of course, the resources available in that program were a camcorder and a classroom. And that's about it. But I still worked. All I read were books. I watched news. I studied intently. And eventually we heard that ABC was hosting an internship called By Kids for Kids, which was a really cool show that they would air Saturday mornings in the 90s. That it was a newscast that was created by kids for kids. And they were looking for anchors. So we ran, and I did my spiel, and I showed my passion. And the reporters that were there that were looking for the next talent sat me down and said, we love your passion. We love what you are bringing to this. But you're not going to make it in this career. You have too much of an accent. And to be honest, you're too ethnic. And I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, honey, I don't think this is the career for you. And I cried. And I went home to my mom and I told her what happened, and we turned on the news, and there wasn't anybody that was not white. There wasn't anybody that had an accent. So after looking and after talking to my broadcasting teachers, who also said, yeah, you're too Latina for this. Unless you want to work for Univision, I don't think this is the dream for you. After hearing all those no's, I left my broadcasting dream. I did, for this talk, look up finally when the first Latina on 60 Minutes, May 2023. That was the first Latina on 60 Minutes. Imagine the representation that we've been missing out for our kids. Or when you tell a kid, or when someone tells one of your students, like, no, you're not going to be in this, you're not good enough. So unfortunately, that dream left. And I was now 14, 15 years old thinking, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life because my entire life was broadcasting and I can't do it. I found out later that all of my friends who did make it through that really cool magnet program, they had voice coaches. They had people that worked on their accents. They changed their names to be very white passing. But these are not resources I had made available to me. So eventually, I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and my senior year of high school, September 11th, happened. And I figured that my country has done so much for me that it was time for me to give back to my country. So I was in JROTC, and I told my instructors, I might want to go to West Point. And all of my male instructors and all of my male colleagues said, there's no way you're ever going to get into West Point. Okay. So I did it. Probably not the best reason to apply to West Point, but that's what I did. So West Point was a really interesting lesson on equity. Because at West Point, this is my class right here, and they would put us always by height order. This is me right here at 5'1", and this is my tallest classmate at 6'4". And when they would have us march in like a platoon, they would have the tallest person go in the front and the shortest person in the back. And they would still want you to march in step, in cadence, meaning that when they call left, 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 right, you have to be in step, whether you are 6'4" or you are 5'1". So guess who was always out of step? Me. Who was always getting in trouble? Me. Because I either looked ridiculous doing this, trying to catch up to a 6'4" step, or I was constantly doing this. That wasn't very equitable. That wasn't meeting me where I was in my stature. And more importantly, they were really good about being equal and accepting women at West Point, but they also wanted us to run at the same pace, do the same amount of pull-ups, carry the same amount of weight. So if my 6'4" companion had to carry one of his friends as a fireman carry, I had to do the same thing. So equal doesn't mean equitable. Eventually, I did get sick, and I had to basically take some time off to go home. So the response was, well, you could go home, get better, and then start over from zero, or you can take your honorable discharge. So there went West Point. Back to Miami. What do I do now? All these dreams keep getting squashed. Well, I keep hearing that my English wasn't good enough, because even at West Point, I kept getting called the Mexican cadet, and I kept talking about what part of Mexico I'm from, and I would say I'm from Venezuela, and they're like, oh, is that the capital of Mexico? And then I kept getting made fun of because I wanted Capri Suns, but apparently it's called Capri Suns. And when I would eat salmon, they're like, there's no L in salmon. So my language apparently was never good enough for anybody. So I figured the best thing to do was to be an English major so that I can fix my English. Not just any English major, British English major. Because that's how you get your English, better. Your English good, right? So I became an English major, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So my friend said, why don't you go teach until you figure it out? Teaching to figure it out meant 15 years. And they were probably some of the best years of my entire life. I taught English the first year, and then I was told, hey, you speak Spanish, right? We need a Spanish teacher. And then that's how I became a language teacher. That's the great story. Eventually, my language teaching led me to heritage language teaching, which led me to a master's, and eventually to a doctorate, which then had me go into the whole advocacy and empowerment that I do now. And lastly, I ended up at ACTFL, which was really interesting at ACTFL because people kept telling me, you have a really good leadership journey and you're a really good leader. Have you ever thought about being like an executive director? And I'm like, no. There's no people like me as an executive director. I've never seen a Latina executive director. And then I got into this program called DELP, which is the Diversity Executive Leadership Program. I went into that room, and out of 150 executive directors in that room, 150 were BIPOC executive directors. How amazing that I got to be surrounded by Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, and Hispanic executive directors who all shattered those ceilings and told me, if we did it, you can do it too. That empowered me to get my CAE, and then now I'm thinking that my trajectory is to be an executive director. But that's only because I saw people that looked like me in a room that said, you can do it too. That's really important. That's a really important part about equity, because a lot of people think of equity as resources, like tangible resources, but sometimes those resources are just having somebody believe in you and you telling people, you can do it, we believe in you. A few things that came to mind about my journey. Number one, my identity was seen as an obstacle that I had to overcome. And a lot of our students still in 2023 feel that way. So think about that as you're talking to your students. I wanted to shatter ceilings and make noise and disrupt, but I honestly didn't know how, and I didn't have any guidance. Not only was a space not created for people like me, but I also wasn't allowed to take up space. I don't know how many rooms I have been in when I started to get kind of bothered or angry at something. I was told, oh, here comes the angry Latina. Don't, take off your hoop earrings, which is why I refuse to wear hoop earrings anymore at work, because I don't want those comments anymore. So these spaces that are supposed to be created for everybody are not very equitable for people like us. So how many of our students or us in this room have been through something like that or have not been granted a space? So keep thinking these things as we continue through this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about creating spaces in education. What does equity in education mean? So it means making sure, again, every student has the resources and support they need to be successful. And it means meeting students where they are. Equity does not equal equality. It could, but we're not talking about the same thing here. Equal means everybody gets everything the same. That is not meeting people where they are. Everyone comes with individual strengths and weaknesses and things that they need help with and resources. Equity is essentially respect. I found when I was a 21-year-old teacher, again, I was not an education major. I went from my British literature to a classroom of 18-year-olds. It was a fun year. I found that my students were eager to come into the classroom, but for very different reasons. I did have students that were eager to come into the classroom because they wanted to learn, and they wanted an A+, and they wanted to get into Harvard. Sorry, Stanford. But then I also found that there were some students that were eager to come to school because they wanted a meal. They wanted breakfast and lunch. They wanted a place that they knew they were going to get fed. With my very meager beginning teacher salary and my parents' Costco card, I had a filing cabinet full of snacks that I would have to replenish once a week because so many of my students went in there starving over the weekend. From Friday through Monday, a lot of them hadn't eaten. Some of my students came in because that was the only safe space that they had, because there was a lot of things going on at home that were not good. They did not feel safe at home. And some of my students came to school knowing that they were going to have somebody that cared about them, that supported them, that if they needed a comb, that I would give them a comb, or if they needed supplies because their parents couldn't buy it for them, or wouldn't buy it for them, or the parents just weren't home, they knew they can count on us there. There are so many reasons why kids come to school. And that was really spotlighted, oh, English major, bad, during the pandemic. 40% of African American students and 30% of Hispanic students in the US K-12 schools received no online instruction during COVID-induced school shutdowns, compared to 10% of white students. I remember for about 2 or 3 months when they were sending laptops home, they then realized that a lot of these students do not have access to Wi-Fi. And they had to send out buses with routers parked near these places so these kids can get online. We're talking about not having Wi-Fi being like the biggest wow. Then we started realizing that parents had to go to the schools to pick up the free and reduced lunches and breakfast because they were not being fed at home. And then we're also talking about the fact that even at Georgetown University, a lot of teachers were very adamant about turning on the cameras. And then what they found out was that a lot of students did not want to turn on their cameras because they were taking their classrooms in the bathtub because that was the only quiet space they had at home, with either 10 siblings or with an alcoholic dad pacing back and forth screaming, or sometimes they were even working out of their parents' food trucks while another student in their class was working out of their summer home in the Hamptons. The inequities were ridiculous, and we expected the same outcomes from all of our students despite what they were doing at home. Equity isn't handing a kid a laptop. It's knowing the systemic condition that led to the lack of a laptop and working to mitigate them. That is important, and that is what we are here for. Not just we as educators, but we as human beings. We as working members in this society need to understand that in 2023, kids still don't have laptops or Wi-Fi or meals or showers or parents. These 3 schools are 3 schools that I taught at in Miami. If you notice, they're all 95% plus minority serving. And they're also total economically disadvantaged, 80% or over. So during the pandemic, I did keep in touch with a lot of my colleagues, and they told me that they were offline for about 3 months with a lot of their students because a lot of their students just could not get online. There was absolutely zero way for them to get online. And even when they came back, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen in your schools, when those kids came back, they were not the same. You could tell whose parents were really involved at home and who had extra resources and who had tutors and whose didn't. And now that inequity that already existed is even more emphasized. So how are we going to catch these students up? How are we going to make our classrooms even more equitable? They were already pretty inequitable, now they're even more so. Speaking of inequitable classrooms, let me give you a tale of two cities in the United States. These are two public schools. Again, two public schools. So I don't know if you can hear very well, but she's saying that they don't even have books for the first graders. So they have to make photocopies of the books, but they don't have ink. So a lot of these things they have to do at home. How are we giving all of our students the proper opportunities to succeed? How is that fair? That one gets a broadcasting room and a radio room and a natatorium, that I had to look up that word when I was looking at this video, and the other students can't even have a gym. They have to walk in the hallways in order to be able to get exercise. This is in the same country. So again, how is that equitable? So now let's create spaces for diverse voices and learning. And before I talk about voices, I do want to admit, and I want to say that I'm cognizant of the fact that I have immense amount of privilege where I am right now at ACTFL, that I have a position of power and of status at ACTFL. So then people say, great, so now you can be the voice for the voiceless. Absolutely not. I am not the voice for the voiceless, because the voiceless have voices. What I'm here to do is I'm here to dismantle, and I'm here to disrupt, and I'm here to tear down those walls so that they can have a platform and a megaphone to speak up for themselves. So I want to make that known very well when I talk about voices. So these factors should never allow to impede students from achieving their utmost educational capacity or receiving support. And I know that in a perfect world, this would be absolutely true, but a lot of these have to deal with our own biases. And that's a big problem, because a lot of us, being human, go into our classrooms with biases about some of these things. And I will give you a perfect example of about my vulnerability. So with the first year that I taught sixth grade, about halfway through the year, a student who was extremely problematic, who was just a very disruptive student, was very below average, didn't do work, didn't engage, was very disruptive, always talked back, made noise, etc. She got passed around from teacher to teacher until she finally came to my classroom. So when she came into my classroom, I told her, look, I know what I know about you, you know what I know about you, but I am going to make my own judgments about you. So you show me what you want me to think about you, and then we'll go from there. So I was having the students do bell work while I took attendance. This was an English class. And once a week, I would meet with them to talk about their journals. In the journal, she said, the topic was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said she wanted to be a surgeon. And she spelled the word surgeon wrong. So I'm looking at that as a human being who is exhausted by this student, the student that doesn't turn in any work, that is disruptive, that is just so obnoxious sometimes, that doesn't try at all. And I'm here in my head laughing, going, okay, surgeon? But I remember my broadcasting experience. And I looked at her and I said, you know, it's going to be a lot of work, and you're going to have to change some habits, but I believe in you. You can do it. You can absolutely do it. You just have to put in the work. And then I got her a dictionary and showed her how to use a dictionary to find out how to spell the word surgeon. And little by little, I saw her change. Little by little, I saw that she started asking for help. And what I found out later was that mom and dad were never home. Mom and dad had 2 to 3 jobs. She was always taking care of her younger siblings. She had a lot of stuff going on at home. She was really behind in reading. She needed glasses, but the parents just couldn't afford glasses. So little by little, we started working on getting her help, getting her resources, getting her extra help after school. I kept in touch with her through Facebook and through email and so forth. And a couple of years ago, I got this email from her. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to report that I have unofficially committed to the Paramount School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. I was selected for the 21st Century Scholars Award, which is UPenn's full tuition merit scholarship. I am incredibly grateful for your mentoring during my not always easiest years. I hope that one day when I am serving as a mentor, I can support my future students half as well as you have done for me. It took one person to just kind of not to give that resource, right? To meet them where they're at and to provide them with those resources. And of course, that's one that I finally got back, because I always hear these great stories and I'm like, when am I gonna get that moment? Some of us may never get that moment, but we are making a difference by meeting them where they are, by supporting them, by even the equity part is just having one person believe in them instead of just laughing them off or saying, you can't do that, you can't even spell the word surgeon. When children are tough to love, that's when we need to love them more. So a big thing I get, okay, that's great, we need to be equitable, we need to meet them where they are. But for a fact, the parents and the student themselves are gonna complain, that's not fair, because if she's getting more help, why am I not getting more help? Or if this student is getting more resources, why is my child not getting more resources? So I have found two really good ways to explain it, and they both have been from TikTok, so thank you, TikTok. The first one that was a kindergarten teacher, which, by the way, everything great has always come from elementary school teachers. What she did is that, I know, right? Yes, clap for elementary school teachers. She asked her students to say, tell me a time that you got a boo-boo. Oh, I got a boo-boo on my knee. So then she's like, okay, here's a Band-Aid for your knee. Put it on your knee. Then she asks the next student, oh, I got a boo-boo on my elbow. Okay, here's this Band-Aid for your knee. But I said elbow. Yeah, I know, put it on your knee. And then she would go through each and every student and they would tell them different places they got boo-boos. And she would always say, put the Band-Aid on your knee. And then at the very end, she asked her students, did the Band-Aid on your knee work for you guys? Oh, only for those kids. Okay. How come it didn't work for the rest of you? Oh, because that's not where I needed it. There you go. There are times that you're gonna need an additional help. There are times that they're gonna need additional help. There are times that they're gonna need additional help. And you have to be okay with understanding that you're not all gonna get the same thing, but you're gonna get the things that are good for you and that are going to help you be successful. And that's what equity is in the classroom. And those students were able to understand that. Another way that we talk about it is size 10 shoes. If you give every single kid in your classroom size 10 shoes, maybe there are a few kids that will be successful with those size 10 shoes. They'll be able to run and walk and jump and whatever. But the other kids, either it's gonna be shoes that are way too big that they're going to trip or just not be able to use them, or they won't be able to even put them on at all. So what do? What's the point of giving them size 10 shoes if they can't use them? So instead, why don't we give them shoes that are their size? Or why don't we modify the shoes and give them thicker socks or stretch out the shoes a little bit? We can meet our students still being fair to all the other students. So I'm gonna talk about three things, and these are gonna be three quick things, because I hope you know that this keynote was not gonna solve all of your equity issues. What I'm doing here is I'm giving you three small kind of PDs or things that you can think about, and I have a resource that I'm going to give CLTA to post on their website. It has presentations, links, books, and articles on all three of these: Universal Design for Learning, Trauma-Informed Teaching, and Differentiated Instruction. So what I'm gonna do right now is just give you a little brief introduction of each to show you how you can adapt these to be equitable, because a lot of these you probably already use in your classroom. Differentiated instruction essentially is getting the same task that you give to all your students and then adapting it for the students that need additional resources. So you can do this by scaffolding, by putting them in small groups, by giving them tiered or group collaboration, and by giving them different materials. Essentially what you're doing is you can have one task, and then for your learners that are struggling, you give them a little bit of extra help. You give them word lists, you give them sentence starters, you give them some phrases, or you model, you use the gradual release of responsibility with them, that you can go to their groups and then model it a little bit more for the ones that need it. The ones that are more advanced, because as we know, there is no such thing as a perfect proficiency language classroom. We're always gonna have kids that are above the proficiency level and below. The ones that are above, you can take that same task and slightly modify it to actually challenge them. You're not giving anybody more or less work. You are giving them the same amount of challenging work that should take them about the same time to do. This is really great, and I'm gonna show you a snippet of this video that kind of explains it.
Differentiated instruction. In some educators, the contradictions of having to create a different lesson for every student in the room and long nights And as educators, we need to recognize those differences and use our professional judgment to flexibly respond in our teaching. Carol Thompson talks about the ability to differentiate in three areas: content, process, and product. For content, student choice is one way.
So they talk about student choice, which is another great segue into universal design for learning, which I think that everyone probably does in some capacity or another, but it's a really, really wonderful way to make sure that your classroom is a little bit more equitable. Essentially, what universal design is options plus one. You're always giving your students an additional option of being able to do something or how to do something so that they can choose the best way that they know how to show you that they understood or they mastered a concept. This is a really great cartoon that essentially explains what universal design for learning is. The cartoon says, oh, I will, let me finish taking out the snow from the stairs so that these students can go, and then I will clear the ramp for you. And the other kid says, well, if you clear the ramp, all the kids can go and I can go. So why don't we do something that's equitable for everybody instead of just doing it by tiers? So essentially, when you're thinking about your IEPs, for example, and we're doing all of these modifications for our students, like additional time and a half, or, oh, this student needs the instructions and you need to read the instructions out loud so that they have it both orally and written. Why don't we do that for all of our students? Why do we have to wait for a student to have an IEP to give them these additional resources? Why don't we make our tests already shorter so that they can take extra time to do it? Why don't we read them the instructions? Why don't we give them the opportunity to do voice to text or text to voice? Why don't we give them the opportunity to handwrite their assignment or type their assignment? What are you really trying to get out of that assignment? Is the assignment that you want to see their handwriting, or is the assignment that you want them to write? If so, what is the big deal about letting them be able to choose the mode that they do it in? That is what universal design for learning is. You have three different things. You have providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So you're always giving them different choices. So if you're asking them to write an argumentative essay, you want them to write an argumentative essay in the target language. Why does it have to be only about one subject? Why don't you give them an array of subjects? If your student does not care about hurricanes, why don't you let them pick a subject that they might be more interested in? Tell me about which football team you think will make it to the Super Bowl this year and why. Okay, or give them something different to persuade upon. Give them different options. If they're really creative and you want them to do an oral task, ask them, do you want to do a podcast? Do you want to do a Shark Tank presentation? Do you want to do a video? There are different ways that they will be more engaged in their learning and you're still getting the same outcome. And you are then leveraging their strength and also being able to meet them where they're at and help them. A lot of times when we don't get things back from our students is because they're not engaged. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's because of you or because of your lesson. It could also be because we need some trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed learning. Our students in 2023, especially us too, I'm talking about students, but I'm also talking about us. We've been through some things. We went through a pandemic. We went through a lot of scary stuff in the last 5-10 years, and we're still going through scary stuff. I mean, I'm from Florida. Have you guys been watching the news? That's all I'm gonna say. So every day there's something else, and it's just exhausting. And if we're not taking care of our mental health, and we're adults, if we're not taking care of our mental health and we're having really bad burnout days, imagine our students who don't know how to regulate their emotions. They don't know how to take a break, or they can't take a break because they have 5 AP classes and they have parents that are putting some crazy expectations on them, and they're getting microaggressions, and they're thinking about how to pay for college. There's a lot of things going on. So getting a little bit of trauma-informed teaching or a little bit of professional development on that, or even just reading it for your own, might be something really good, because then you can bring that empathy and that sense of safety into your classrooms and make it a more equitable classroom. Because again, you're meeting your students where they are emotionally, when I guarantee you that a lot of those parents are not meeting them emotionally at home. And not because it's their fault, but maybe they don't have the capacity to meet their kids where they are. The single most important thing educators can do is to form trusting relationships with their students. Now, I think so far I've sold you on a lot of these things, right? And you're like, you've been nodding your heads. Now I'm gonna completely destroy that. ChatGPT. So, ChatGPT and AI, yes, there's a lot of ethical issues we need to consider. There are a lot of things we need to teach our students about ChatGPT and AI, how to use it responsibly and how to use it ethically. Absolutely. It's filled with bias, it's filled with misogyny, and a lot of really crazy stuff because it's getting their information from the internet, 100%. But ChatGPT might actually make learning more equitable. Let me have another teacher explain why. So 2 points. If the student does decide to use ChatGPT or AI as help, that might be something that they've never been able to have. Maybe they've never had the opportunity to have help from somebody from home. So now they actually do have an additional resource that they can leverage to get help. Sorry, if you want to look away. And number 2, if we do stop having these assignments at home and put them more in the classroom, then you take away that additional help from the parents and only really judge based on what's in the classroom. So you are making what the students bring into the classroom much more equitable, because then you're taking away that parental resource that a lot of kids don't have. Apart from that, by the way, this slide was made by ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, kind of like an inception, hey, can you make a slide about yourself trying to convince teachers why they should use you? And it came out with this. It even gave you exactly how to use universal design for learning with ChatGPT and OpenAI. So there are ways. It can be a conversational partner. It can be a place to kind of spitball ideas. It can be a starting point. It can be a way for them to kind of get feedback from their writing, because there's no parent at home, especially if that parent doesn't speak the language, to be able to get someone to give them feedback. So it could be used as an additional tool if those kids at home don't have those parental supports. And again, when we're looking at our assessments and we're looking at our tasks, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And we're asking them to all do it. Our students are just like this. Some of our students might be excellent at this. They might be whizzes at math, but they can't necessarily write. When I was doing research, one of the things that I found that was always problematic in research was that we were making a lot of assumptions about, oh, how do the kids write in the target language? But we never stopped to think, well, is that how they write in their first language too? Maybe they don't know how to write a paragraph in any language. And we're assuming that this, control didn't really work in the target language, but maybe they don't know how to do that in any language. So we need to think about what our students can and can't do. So let's finish up with creating spaces for action. And I like this because I'm a runner now in the last year or so, so I call myself a runner. The journey towards equity is not a sprint, but a marathon. It is an ongoing commitment to constantly challenge and question our own biases, our teaching practices, and the institutional structures that perpetuate inequity. This is a long road. Every single day I'm learning something else. Every single day I am self-reflecting. I am doing a lot of difficult work on my own biases, on my own kind of things that I have inside to be a better person, to be a more equitable teacher, a more equitable colleague, a more equitable boss for my staff. But let me give you a few kind of tidbits to leave if you have to leave with something today. When you ask your students about, tell me about, a lot of these things are just seeped into our lesson plans, even our textbooks, right? When you ask someone to do a family tree, have we thought about what their family looks like at home? Because the family tree usually has like mom, dad, and whatever. What if they don't have mom and dad? What if they have moms? What if they have mom and that's it? What if they only have grandparents? What if they're a foster child? What if they're adopted and they can't tell you their lineage? So these kind of questions are already making it a little bit more inequitable for some of our students. Or when we ask them, what did you get for Christmas, right? Where did you go for summer? Maybe where they went for summer was home to take care of my siblings. So just kind of how we phrase questions, and of course my favorite question, where are you from, right? So how we phrase things, how we think about assignments, let's make assignments, either give them options. So if they don't want to do the family tree, maybe ask them, hey, for a really cool challenge, do the Game of Thrones family tree, or do Harry Potter's family tree, or talk about a holiday that you want to make up and how you would celebrate that holiday, right? Again, check your own assumptions. And I put parents with little asterisks because I was that person that would always tell my husband when I was really frustrated at work, you know, I wish Helen's parents would come to parent-teacher night or to parent conferences, and Helen's parents never show up. And I would always kind of be angry at Helen's parents because Helen's parents did not take an initiative in their child's education. But again, I didn't think about the fact that Helen's parents maybe have a bunch of siblings. Maybe Helen's parents can't take time off from their job to then come to a 5 o'clock parent-teacher conference. We have to think about how to meet the parents there too. It might not necessarily be the parents' fault. And of course, maintaining high expectations. When we're talking about meeting our students where they are, I'm not asking you to lower your standards or lower your expectations. I'm asking you to keep your still high expectations and couple it with sufficient and adequate resources for them, but still demand excellence because they can do it with the right support. Let's go back to our empty chair. Let's come back full circle. When we started, we were looking at this as a symbol of exclusion. We were looking at it as a symbol of those who have not been heard, who have not been seen, and who are not represented. But I challenge you for this whole week that you are here in this wonderful place, learning from so many wonderful speakers. Think about again how this instead could be an invitation. It can be an invitation for you to make a difference in a child's life by bringing in their culture, by bringing in their language, by bringing in their perspectives. Use it as a way for us to continue to ensure that whatever practices we are doing in our classroom do not cause more empty chairs, and that instead we are filling them, whatever that may look like. And as we part ways, we are not just educators. We are architects of equity, builders of bridges, and creators of space. So let's continue to create, continue to inspire, and continue to make sure there are no more empty chairs. I like to talk about why I do what I do, and I always have my parents who brought me here, my son, my husband, but I think a big reason that I'm here is you. And with that, thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. Good luck this week.